Ladies and gentlemen, the Singapore stock market is having signs of an explosive growth that's potentially happening. And I think it's important for us to take note of it. And maybe the worst days of the Singapore stock market is over and good days are all ahead. Let's watch on, shall we? Today, we'll talk about a sentiment turnaround for the Singapore stock market. And potentially it's rekindling not just from the rise of some of the major counters and a new STI index record high, but there is now a big initial public offering revival story. I think it's important for us to take note of it, and it could spell very different for the fortunes of SGX, the company as well. So let's just watch on, shall we? So in summary, now there is a pipeline of IPOs that are coming. They have 30 companies now in the pipeline that's wanting to list in the stock market, and that's very impressive. So in a news article, SGX says that over 30 companies is now in the IPO pipeline, and they're eyeing for more acquisitions right now. So the SGX has more than 30 companies in a pipeline of IPOs and has already hired advisors and started preparatory listing work. One of my investor company has also started the preparation work and is probably one of the 30 companies that is highlighted here. And I know that there is a lot of competition right now, so I can verify this news that this excitement is really true. Now, more are contemplating going IPO in Singapore. At the SGX, head of global sales has actually reviewed it. Now, this is going to be a hallmark for the SGX performance. So SGX CEO say that we're on track to achieve 6 to 8% growth in our group revenue in the medium term, and we will also strengthen our high quality multi-asset product shelf across asset class, geography, and themes. So for 12 months to June, the net profit rose 8.4% to about $648 million from a year ago, and that's very significant. And this is something that we should really get excited on finally, to see our local stock market now having growth that is unseen for a long time. So SGX has seen a dearth of listing and a wave of delisting for a long period of time. That includes the first half of 2025. But there are signs of recovery in the second half with new entrants such as Infotech System, Lam Chang Creation, and the famous NTT DC REIT that everybody is rushing for. So the sentiment have changed from one that is caution to one that is confidence right now. So I quote the head of global sales, we are certainly much more positive. There's definitely more a risk-on approach, more confidence around rates outlook, more confidence around growth. So the interest rate coming down or potentially coming down has lifted up the entire wave. Now, I need to say this about business, investment, and opportunity. Okay, it's really about timing. And don't believe this nonsense that timing is not important and time in the market is more important. It is true, time in the market is more important, but when you fire your shot, when you invest in a company, when you set up a company, when you enter in a JV, timing is all it matters, right? So there's no point rushing into businesses, investment, and all this when the timing is wrong. So indeed, right now, there's a shifting risk appetite. The rates now look very positive in terms of a rate cut, and growth is a lot more confident right now in Singapore and broader base, despite a backdrop of a tariff uncertainty. So the entire global IPO is lifting up, particularly in US. Okay, they're creating a strong positive momentum that they are rippling into Singapore. So this is something that is a global phenomenon. So there are also quite a lot of regulatory change in Singapore as well, and they have streamlined a lot of the listing requirement. It's not as difficult right now, making it easier for growth companies to access public markets. Now, take note, in the past, SGX will only accept companies that's performed really well historically. Growth companies are really generally, a lot of them are in some sense, investing for growth, so they are not having a good track record. And in Singapore, we tend to frown on these companies. Okay, so now things are a little bit different. There's a disclosure-based regime as well, and there is some removal of financial watch list constraint, making it easier and reduce the fear of being delisted for companies that are facing temporary challenge. and so on. So they have made the environment in Singapore a lot more easier for listing, and that attracted more companies who want to come. So not to forget, the MAS have invested, okay, $5 billion into an equity fund headed by 3 companies, of which one of them is Mr. Ng Kok Song's company. And this was aimed to stimulate the medium-sized and small-sized company in the Singapore stock market. There's a 20% tax incentive, okay, for new listings, and that's actually quite attractive. And 2 times institutional participation, okay, target to double institutional investors' involvement instead of just a retail customer. So all these are very powerful stimulation into the market. Now, the regional markets are also having some positive flow over to us. Because of the US-China trade war, companies from Greater China are increasingly seeking dual listing or secondary listing in SGX as an alternate international venue. And I think these positive flow over. Don't forget, I always say that many Chinese companies are potentially trying to do some nationality laundering. And they're trying to come over to rest of the world. I'm sure Singapore is one of them. And hopefully that will also have a flow-on effect to our Singapore stock market. So the pipeline today looks diverse and promising, okay, with many companies from technology, REITs, corporate spin-off, healthcare. And this pipeline are companies potentially range from anything from $200 million to billions of dollars. Hopefully this will spark off IPO fever and then stimulate the entire economy. So the idea is that these are catalysts to spark off a wave of tsunami, you know, that's going to come to revamp the whole Singapore stock market. Now, however, let's not be blind that Singapore stock market still have issue. My biggest bugbear is that the Singapore stock market is filled with dividend-seeking investors. Singapore investors are very risk-averse and they're dividend-seeking, and they actually punished growth companies' valuation. As a result, you know, if you don't like growth companies will not come. And you only attract dividends company with stable cash flow. And as a result, the market don't go very excited, right? So we somehow must find a way to reward growth companies or risk a very slow growth image. And Singapore stock market is one with very low trading liquidity across the board. Valuations for small to mid cap is very miserable. And we are just reliant on a few large counters, in particular the 3 banks, Singtel, and so on. And we have a very limited analyst coverage for this smaller listing. I think that there is some serious structural concerns and challenge that our Singapore stock market need to overcome. But you know what? The government is putting a lot of attention into it. SGX is putting a lot of attention to it. MAS is putting a lot of attention into it. Maybe this will spark off a new wave of change. 2024, I think if the listings does come in and perform well, this will spark off more listing to come. So for 2025, if all the listings were to do well, then the whole momentum will change and spark off more listings to come and get a lot of investors excited, okay? And that will spark off a revival of the Singapore stock market. So I think for SGX as a company, as a counter, I think there will be a lot more listing fees, and I think the stock price will benefit tremendously from it if all the IPOs were to come. And this would now improve our image now as a financial center for equities, right? We have always been good for Forex, other instruments, but not for equities, right? So this is something that I think could potentially change if this wave of revival will come. So I think right now, SGX and Singapore stocks are at a point of inflection. We have one shot to get this right. We miss this wave and somehow all the counters get disappointed and just leave the market, then we're done with, right? So we must not miss this wave of recovery. And therefore, SGX and the Singapore government must go out and attract the best companies to IPO, have secondary listing, make the environment very friendly for companies to perform, and have a healthy balance between regulation and growth, and also try to attract institutional investors that will not just be looking at dividends like the average investors. And as a result, this could uplift the entire Singapore stocks. So to sum up, I think that the potential for Singapore stocks is there. It might be a change. I've always not have a very good opinion for Singapore stocks because of the super terrible index. There's a 17 to 18 years lag. But I think things are changing. Let's be cautiously optimistic. Okay. I don't need to be gung-ho to rush into this market, but I think that some diversification is good as well. You may choose to put a 5%, 10%, or whatever number into the Singapore stock market to diversify out from the risk of US stock market. That's also an opportunity as well. Okay. Let me hear views and I'll see you tonight for a live stream. Bye-bye.